Hello and welcome to another episode of A Glass with Billy. I'm joined today by a special guest.
Forrest? I always do it with a question.
Why are you saying it as a question?
It's called Up Talk.
I have a guest with me and his name is...
And I shouldn't really be talking like this, but I'm doubtful.
But you still do it anyway?
Maybe it's because the cameras are in front of me and I'm very nervous.
Joined today with...
Forrest.
Who are you, Forrest?
Who am I? Yeah, so I'm Forrest. We're filming here today at my university, at Sogang University. I study psychology, English literature, and education. I've lived in Korea for 6 years, studied for 9. Yeah, that's it.
Since it's A Glass with Billy, we have a couple drinks today. I have 오란씨.
Mr. 오란씨?
오란씨.
I feel like it's like seed.
Yeah, no, it's Mr. today.
It's Mr.?
Yeah.
Sure.
And this is like a pineapple drink. And you have what Korean drink do you have?
Very Korean Dr. Pepper.
Ah, Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
Nah, I don't like it. It's just like carbonated, low-calorie pineapple juice.
It's more the aftertaste for me.
But the aftertaste happens while you're drinking it.
Yeah, that's why I don't like it.
Today we're going to be talking about some language learning lies you may have been told.
Lies. Everything you've learned with Billy is a lie.
Yeah. And we have several things that we have noticed a lot of people talking about in the language learning community, and we're going to be correcting some of that today.
We're basically the Mythbusters today, I guess.
Sure. The first language lie that maybe is the most common one is that you can learn Korean only through lots of listening practice.
Oh, like I know, so-and-so who learned by only watching, dramas.
That's true.
Yeah, right? Or like reading a ton of webtoons. Like you can get tons of exposure, tons of input, right? And gain a better understanding, a better feel for the language, but when it comes to like pronunciation, if you're not actually like practicing every single day, like speaking, your pronunciation is actually just going to sound like you're speaking in English because you haven't had the practice to like develop that sort of muscle memory in your tongue, your mouth, your lips, like everything, because the way you're gonna form all of that is going to be different from like either English or your whatever native language you speak. So you still need to practice speaking, especially if your goal is to actually speak the language and use it.
So you can't get fluent just by listening to something, no matter how much of it is that you're listening to.
Yeah.
One of the things though that is really helpful is that when you are just finding things to listen to find things that are more comprehensible to you. So instead of going out and finding like a medical drama, finding like a regular variety show with maybe about a topic that you're already comfortable with, and then being able to hear a few new words, but also recognizing stuff you already know.
So yeah, when we talk about comprehensible input, it's the idea of like I plus 1. So this I is basically like, essentially like your current level, like how easy the material or media, whatever you use.
Okay.
Like, so basically the I is your level and you want to add plus 1 difficulty. So if you understand everything, that there's no point. So it shouldn't be too easy and it shouldn't be too hard. That's why textbooks are designed in a way that it builds upon each level, right? It's going to push you just a little bit. If it's too easy, you're not going to be interested. If it's too hard, you're not going to be interested, and it's going to be like painful and boring. So you just want it to push you just a little bit. So that's the whole thing with comprehensible input. And so it's actually really hard to find Korean dramas and even webtoons, especially. The stuff they talk about in dramas is going to be pretty difficult to understand. So it's not plus 1, it's like probably plus 3 or
right.
Depending on your level. Personally, in my opinion too, I think there does come a time where you can also kind of just go with it, right? Because if you're interested and you like what you're watching or reading, right, it's going to be even more motivating. So,
even if it's a little too hard.
So it should still be able to push you because you're like, oh, I want to understand what that person's saying or what they're talking about. I want to have a deeper understanding of like, Korean culture and things like that. But it's still a good thing to keep in mind while sorting through media that you want to use for study, like specifically. Yeah, you definitely want to kind of keep the idea of comprehensible input in the back of your head.
But then, would you get fluent in Korean only through doing lots and lots and lots of comprehensible input?
It depends on your definition of fluent, I think. Most likely no.
You can just say no.
Yeah, just no. It doesn't matter how much you've heard Korean, you still won't understand, where to place your tongue in your mouth. It's like, okay, is my tongue like touching like the back of my teeth? Is my tongue like more back? Is it flat? Obviously, when we're listening and if we do like shadowing, for example, we're not actually really thinking about where we're placing all these things.
Yeah.
We're just trying to mimic it as much as possible, but that mimicking, that whole process is being skipped. If you're just getting input, you're just listening to stuff, right? So if you're just listening, you're not actually speaking, then your comprehension will probably be pretty high, but in terms of speaking, it'll probably be very difficult. You wouldn't be very fluent.
So the myth that you can learn solely through listening and reading, what's the conclusion? Busted, true?
Busted.
Busted.
Yeah.
The next language learning myth is, it starts like this. You can learn Korean in insert number of months, insert number of years.
Nanoseconds.
You can learn Korean in 1 nanosecond. There really isn't any sort of set number for any sort of level.
Like everyone is different. When I was like first starting out learning Korean, and I was like putting in definitely too many hours into studying, I would say that I was able to like understand and like talk about like simple topics without much like struggle around like 6 to 7 months. And just because I put in all that time, it also depends on like how much effort you're putting in, the type of effort, like how you're studying, things like that. Like all those factors you have to keep in mind.
6 hours of, reading this book versus 6 hours of reading a different book, or talking with this person versus talking with this person, and all of those.
Like I would have had different language exchange partners compared to everyone else. I have a different tutor than other people might have. Like there's just all those factors. So even though that was possible for me, it doesn't mean it's possible for like everyone. You could even live in Korea, go to language school, and it's very possible to still not be able to like carry a conversation after that. Again, it depends on the person, right? Like, are you trying to practice things outside of the textbook as well, like, and learn things that are meaningful to you?
Right. And I'll say this also, even if you knew exactly what a certain person did to learn Korean to a specific level and you apply it to yourself, doesn't really mean at all that you're going to get the same results.
I've seen some of these people actually become demotivated because they met someone that speaks better than them, but they studied for less time. You really have to stop comparing yourself to other people, right? Sure, it can be motivating, but it can also be very demotivating. So like any, types of like language apps or like programs that are like, oh, learn X language in X amount of time, do not trust those things.
The next language lie is that you can learn Korean like a child. Have you heard people say they're going to do this?
Lots of people. Most of them always ask for like, oh, what types of children's shows are good for like learning, or like what kinds of children's books are good. Basically, they're asking like, oh, should I read Dr. Seuss, or should I read like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
In Korean?
In Korean. Even though it wasn't the most practical, actually it wasn't practical at all. There's a lot of literal translation, right?
Sure, it's not a Korean book.
Yeah, it's not a Korean book. But, back then I was a beginner and I didn't know what was awkward and what was not.
Right.
I didn't really realize how written Korean and spoken Korean are different. The difference between colloquial, speech and like formal speech. So it was helpful for just kind of understanding like Korean sentence structure. But in general, like you have to remember that children's books, they're made for native Korean children. And the way native Korean children learn Korean is totally different from a learner, right?
Sure. You don't want to waste 3 years to learn how to say your first sentences.
Yeah. The language is also very different. Like you'll see in children's books, right? like lots of onomatopoeia. Like obviously they're used in spoken Korean or whatever.
Do you really need to learn how to say like
when are you gonna be like
bouncy
yeah, 강중,
when you can't introduce yourself?
Yeah, you know, when we're kids, the way we speak is different compared to when we're adults, right? Like it's just a huge misconception that anything that is made for Korean children is going to be easy for a learner.
That stuff is more difficult.
Yeah.
All right, the next language lie that we're going to be talking about is that you can learn Korean while you're asleep.
이상 evil.
The next language lie that we're going to talk about is that you learn Korean simply by being in Korea. And this is also false.
Not totally false. There
Sure.
are, like, it depends on, obviously, the person. But it is actually really common. Like, I'll meet someone that's lived here for even longer than I have, like 10 years, right? And they're like, yeah, I don't speak any Korean. And I'm like, huh? I can never imagine myself living here without speaking Korean.
Being in Korea is a huge advantage, of course. But I guess the lie is that just being in Korea, that means you're going to get good at Korean, is completely false.
Yeah, I guess a good example is English teachers in Korea. You're most likely going to be working in English.
Right,
Like,
they hired you because they want an English speaker.
yeah, like they want you to also teach the entire class in English. And I've even had some people tell me to pretend like I can't speak Korean. And sometimes I feel like I have to do that to just get them to speak more, because if they find out that my Korean's like, you know, really good, they're going to tend to want to just keep speaking in Korean, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people that own those academies, they will specifically tell them like, do not speak Korean. And then also the people that you work with, they essentially also speak English, and so they're there to help you with like
Right.
everything, like finding a house, like dealing with medical stuff.
Right,
Like
and then
yeah.
you end up getting a house in a place where the landlord speaks English.
Yeah, the
Find-
school and the company just handle everything,
Sure.
basically.
You could live comfortably in Korea. Well, less than comfortably,
That's-
but
yeah.
you can live in Korea,
You'd have to bug a lot of people.
bugging a lot of people, but you can speak only English and you can get by.
Yeah, it is changing though. There's actually a lot more foreigners like really trying hard to like learn Korean. But you can see that they're putting in the effort. They're really trying.
Okay, the next myth is that you can learn Korean all by yourself. I've met some people who will be completely absorbed in their immersion, where they'll only do listening to Korean and only do speaking in Korean. And then people on the other side who they don't have Korean friends, they don't have Korean tutors, but they're like really into the books. You know, they have all these textbooks, vocab books. Neither of those two camps are gonna get that far by themselves.
At first I was this other half. I was like, okay, I've just revolved my life around Korean as much as possible. And it helped for sure. But there did come a point where I was like, I was actively listening to stuff and I would come across like grammar that I've never seen before. And then I was like, oh, I need to learn grammar. You know, I started learning grammar. I got books, I got a tutor like that was focused more on grammar.
One of the other things that I've seen a lot of people do on the book side is shadowing, which is also very important and can help you, which is where you just listen to something and you try to repeat it back as close to the way it was said as possible, but that will still have its limits.
Yeah.
So you can't just get fluent in Korean by saying, well, I'll study Korean through books and lessons all by myself, but you know, I'll also add in some shadowing practice. I'll also speak to myself in Korean a little bit, and that'll make up for it. And that doesn't completely make up for it.
I've seen a lot of YouTube videos or apps that like promote shadowing, and they're like, oh, you can become fluent, right? You know, like, oh, through shadowing, you can sound native. The key thing there is like you can sound, in terms of pronunciation, you can sound native, maybe near native or close to it, but it doesn't mean that you can just copy and like, you know, mimic after hearing something right away and like also somehow be able to understand what you're even mimicking. You still need to like sit down, look at the sentence and break it down. And then if there's different contexts, you know how to take what's needed and make it into a different sentence that is appropriate for that context.
And the next lie that we have for you, dating a Korean or marrying a Korean will let you speak fluent Korean.
I personally don't have experience, but I have like a ton of Korean friends. Like I can ask those friends like questions about grammar or like, oh, why is this awkward? Even those friends, even though they're not like my partner or whatever, like it doesn't matter. They can't explain usually
Sure.
like why. They're like, oh, it just sounds more natural.
I guess the exception to this would be is if you're dating or marrying a Korean teacher.
But you have to remember too that like you shouldn't be dating someone, right, for them to teach you like their language. Like I have friends, you know, Korean friends that are dating foreigners. It's just like sort of frustrating for them. Yeah, maybe it can help here and there, like if you ask every now and then.
Myself as well, I'm married and my wife has been, I love her. She's a very helpful person, but for my Korean, she has not been very helpful.
But she can correct naturalness.
Sure,
at
I can
least.
say,
Yeah.
hey, which of these two sentences sounds more natural to you? And she'll be like, maybe the first. And I'm like, thank you so much.
So that's what I do with my friends too. If I'm really struggling with like how to phrase something, I'll send it to multiple friends and get their input.
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of combine it. It's like a chemistry, like it's like a
Like the
potion.
Walter White
yeah.
meme. And another thing that I'll say, you might not realize this, but when you are dating someone, you get really good at communicating with that person, even if you've said something wrong.
Like you're communicating too, and plus you don't want to break the flow of conversation either, right?
If you make
Like,
a mistake,
suddenly like, oh,
hold on,
hold
baby.
on, yeah.
You used a gerund in that sentence.
As a learner too, you're gonna get frustrated, and then as their romantic partner, you're gonna get
Yeah.
frustrated. So it's,
So yeah, it doesn't help as much as you think it does.
if one person too in the relationship is like better at the language, you know,
Usually will end up being English.
yeah, there are a few cases where actually the foreigner or the learner,
Yeah, knows more.
yeah,
knows
more
Korean,
more
than
Korean,
their
yeah. So in that case, but that's pretty unlikely, and especially when it comes to Korea. You know, Koreans have been learning English for 10 plus years
Yeah.
usually. So
English. But it's not the norm.
yeah.
So have you ever heard any of these language lies before? Or have you heard any different ones? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again to our guest.
Forest.
See you next time. 그럼?
Whoa.
What was that?
Oh, it was like a trash, like, or garbage truck or something.
그럼 다음에 또 봐.